Hello, my name is Kat, and today I will be continuing the Factors of a Great Novel series with style and structure. Now that we have our characters, our world, and our story, it is time to give this story some shape. Structure is the foundation for the story. If story were a person, then structure is the skeleton, and the characters and the world and emotions and description and all that stuff, those are the flesh and blood and heart and soul of a story. I also want to talk about stylistic things to consider when writing a novel. These are things like deciding which point of view to use, first or third, which tense will you use, present, past, how many narrators will you have, how many chapters will your story have, and will those chapters be short or long or vary in length? What moods do you want to capture with your story? Do you want to write something darker and serious and somber, or do you want to write something more lighthearted and silly and fun? What themes or truths are you trying to highlight and illustrate with your story? If you've already drafted your story, then you've probably decided most of the stuff already, but if it wasn't an intentional decision, you might want to think about it a little bit more. The big theme of last week's video about story was that everything happens for a reason. And this should be true about the authorly decisions that you have to make as well. Don't choose first-person point of view simply because it is your favorite point of view. Choose the point of view that works best for the story you are trying to tell. One thing that I think is really important when you're writing a story is that nothing is set in stone. Don't be afraid to make big changes if you have to. Your goal in revising the story is not to improve it with the least amount of work. Your goal is to tell the story in the best possible way for that particular story. Sometimes this means giant rewrites. Maybe you realize that the first-person point of view that you originally chose isn't allowing you to tell the complete story and you have to switch to third-person point of view. Or it might be the opposite. Maybe you realize that the third-person point of view is keeping the reader too distanced from the character and you want to switch to first to create a more intimate feel. Just keep these things in mind and be active when making the decision. Don't just passively go with the first thing that hits you or whatever thing is the easiest. Alright, that takes care of the stylistic things. Let's talk about structure now. There are many variations of structure. 3-act or 2-act or 4-act or no act. Lots of variations. But no matter the structure, there are certain elements that will stay the same. Primarily, that every single story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's why I personally prefer 3-act structure, because then Act 1 is the beginning, Act 2 is the middle, and Act 3 is the end. Also, I kind of have a thing with 3s and multiples of 3, which is why I divide every story into 3 acts, and then divide each act into 3 blocks, and then divide each block into 3 chapters. And that is my method. I'll elaborate a little bit more on that in a minute, but let's talk beginnings, middles, ends. The beginning of a story introduces the main character and their life situation before the story kicks off. And the story kicks off with the inciting incident. This is an event that happens to the main character that sets their life in a new direction. After the inciting incident, the main character has appropriate reactions and experiences the appropriate effects of this event. These reactions and effects change the life of the main character. They push the character away from their boring static life and into the new dynamic world of life after inciting incident. This is the transition between the beginning and the middle of the story. Once the character is fully pushed into the new world of the story, that's when the middle starts. Now, the middle holds one very important structural event, and that is the midpoint. Before the midpoint, we usually have the character experiencing the new world. Often this involves a contrast between the new world and the old world, and a lot of stress involving the transition from old to new. The midpoint happens when the stakes are really raised and the main character often has to make a big decision. The midpoint is usually seen as a point of no return, and it tends to be a big transitional stage for the development development of a character arc. If your character starts off very weak and not heroic, but they end the story a hero, then the midpoint is where they take that first big step toward becoming a hero. If you're writing a romance, then your characters start off not in love and they end up in love. And you have some options for the midpoint. Maybe they start to realize their feelings for each other. Or maybe one of them makes a confession. Or maybe they even get together, because here at the midpoint, that's still early enough for them to break up at the darkest moment and then get back together for their happy ending. Speaking of darkest moment, this is another important part of the story. Before your main character can save the day and get their happily ever after, they have to reach rock bottom. The darkest moment usually happens around the 75% mark. I use a 3-act structure that is equal. Every act is the same amount of chapters, pages, but I said there are variations of structure. There are variations of structure within structure. There are multiple versions of the 3-act structure, and in some of those versions, the first act is only 25% of the story, the second act is 50% of the story, and the third act is 25% of the story. So that 75% mark hits right at the transition from middle to end. And now we reach the end. Your character has just experienced their darkest moment. All hope is lost, and the bad guys are gonna win, and everything just sucks. It's sad time in Storyland, but just temporarily. Your character finds the strength to go on, and darkest moment or not, nothing is gonna bring them down. They are gonna keep on keeping on. The hero or heroes will overcome their darkest moment. And they do this by finding the power within themselves, the power that they didn't know they had, the power that they didn't have at the beginning of the story. Your main character at the beginning of the story could not overcome this darkest moment if they hadn't experienced all of their transformations throughout the middle of the story. All the growth your character has done so far is what helps them overcome this darkest moment, find the power within themselves, and carry the story through to the end. So after they have found their power within, they take action. While the inciting incident is something that happens to the hero and starts the story, this kind of mirror effect at the end is the hero taking charge and taking action, and they are the ones making things happen now. They are the ones forcing the story to progress. They make the plot converge, and then we have our final battle and the climax and the resolution, and they all lived happily ever after, the end. Alright, that is my quick briefing on style and story structure. Once again, I will repeat my advice of study, 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 research, research, research. Now, I don't have a lot of stuff to do to my novel having to do with this structure theme. You might be aware that I am an outliner. I don't pant stories, I plot a lot. I will start with a premise or a character quality or some kind of central conflict, and I will turn straight to this 3-act, 9-block, 27-chapter structure, and I will start with that. Check out this video if you would like to know more about my in-depth structure skeleton method theory thing. Yeah. One of these days I'm going to take an idea that I haven't yet outlined, and I will make a video kind of doing a live outline to show you guys exactly how I use this structure to make a story. But today is not that day. Today I have shared everything I wanted to share with you. I hope you enjoyed this video. The next installment of Factors of a Great Novel, Emotions, will be out sometime next week. And in the meantime, I will have a new vlog up in a couple of days. So I will see you then. Goodbye!